Celebrate Thanksgiving with Safeway. This week at Safeway, get whole Signature Farms frozen turkey, 10 to 15.5 pounds for $8 each, or 16.1 to 22 pounds for $10 each. Member price of the minimum $50 purchase, limit one per household. Plus, packs of Coca-Cola, Pepsi, 7-Up, Dr. Pepper, or AHA sparkling water are buy two, get three free. Limit 3 free items. Also this week, get 5-pound bags of Signature Farms russet potatoes for 97 cents each with digital coupon. Limit 1. Visit Safeway.com or head in store for more details.
Hi, my name is Richard Dishers, and this is How Did That Happen? A podcast where I look at everyday things or events and try to figure out how they came to be. Every week I will research one topic, and by the end of the episode, I hope to truly have the answer to the question, how did that happen? Alright, thanks for tuning in for another episode of How Did That Happen? This is episode 4, and this week I will be telling you about the 5-day work week and how it formed over time. Before we get that started, I do want to say that we have started a Twitter account for this podcast for How Did That Happen. It is at HDTHappen, and you can go follow us on there. And I post pictures and links related to the past and the future episodes, as well as facts that I may have forgotten to put in or got edited out. But yeah, I mean, go on there if you want to. And here's the episode. Per the usual at this point, we have to go back in time to look at what things were like before the 5-day work week. We will start in the late 18th century. During that time, farming was king, and the average workday was around 12 hours, and the work week consisted of 6 or even 7 days sometimes, which comes to almost 80 hours a week. The workday was also dictated by the seasons, meaning that there were shorter work days in the winter. From there, we moved to the Industrial Revolution, where days and lengths of days were about the same as they were in the late 18th century. The difference is that the work hours are being controlled by the factory owners now instead of like the farming, where it's like you do, with your job, you work for another farm or something like that, and now you work in a factory. They're being controlled by the factory owners, and the seasons, they don't make a difference because they have gas lighting now. In 1840, President Van Buren issues an executive order that says if you work for the federal government, then you fall under what's called the 10-hour system. This shortened the day for some trades. They say it lengthened them for others, but I didn't find any evidence of that, but I mean, I'm not the authority on this stuff. It allowed the manual labor hours to match those of government office hours, which meant that guys that were like doing like hard, like actual physical labor were working longer hours at the time when if you worked in an office, you were only worked 8-hour days, maybe 10-hour days in the summertime is what they said. And this started in 1836, which was actually 4 hours before President Van Buren issues the executive order. But this is the executive order for basically every federal government worker that worked for the federal government. This is the first national labor law of note. The rest are done before this are done regionally or in large cities like New York or Philadelphia, but never before had there been such a far-reaching order. Post-Civil War sees the creation of what are called Grand 8 Hours Leagues, which is a great name. They promote the idea of the 8-hour workday, obviously. This is interesting because, as you will see, that would not really occur for another 50 years. 1874 sees the first state legislation aimed at controlling the amount of time an employee could work, and that comes from Massachusetts in the form of the 10 hours law. This only applied to women, though, and it would take 5 years before it would actually go into effect fully. So, it wouldn't be till 1879 before. And it's good to note now, as well as whatever legislation that we'll talk about as it goes forward. All of this was subject to like loopholes, and like whoever was in charge, as anybody who's worked any kind of job knows, is like, yeah, you have rules, but it really comes down to whoever's actually overseeing that task or overseeing that job or that company until they get caught doing whatever bad stuff they're supposed to do. So while we say 5 years until it went into full effect, it probably was another 20 years before it was even considered commonplace, So they're probably getting away with it for a long time before they actually enforce stuff like that. By comparison, the first legislation with a focus on working hours in England was called the Factory Act. The first iteration of this occurred in 1802, and it basically said that if you were under the age of 9, then you had to go to school, which is a pretty cool rule if you think about it. A lot of employers were wary of giving their giving their employees more time off because they were afraid it would lead to them to drink more, which seems kind of ridiculous, but evidently it was a real issue back then. And yeah, I guess so. If it saves your life to go to work. It appears that Henry Ford is the pioneer of the modern work week, and we have a quote here from him that I'll read, and it says, "Just as the 8-hour day opened our way to prosperity in America, so the 5-day work week will open our way to still greater prosperity. It is high time to rid ourselves of the notion that leisure work for workmen is either lost time or a class privilege." End quote. It's important to note that while adopting this structure, it was also in his service as well, because he did this while still allowing his factories to work for the 24-hour workday. So he just split his 24-hour workday, or however he was running it, into 3 different shifts of 8 hours. And this worked well for the time, as the Great Depression was happening and then ending. It allowed for them to give more shifts out because there were less work hours, which equated to more shifts, and so it allowed for more people to have the opportunity to work. The same sentiments had been mentioned in 1827 by a man by the name of William Hyton in Philadelphia, who circulated pamphlets and gave speeches on how the excessive work hours, and I'm quoting here, were stealing the extra labor of working men, and that in order to be good citizens of the Republic, working men needed shorter hours to allow time for education about public affairs. I just put this in here to say that Henry Ford wasn't the first person to make this connection. You know, like the connection of people, if they work less, then they'll have more time to do stuff. You know, like it didn't take us until 1920 to figure that out. It just took us till 1920 before somebody cared enough to actually do something about it. Ford even tried to lobby the president, President Wilson at the time, to make the 8-hour workday a national standard, but the president refused due to the heat that he was receiving from other national business owners, who, you know, were the big worry about the shortening of the hours was that it was going to eat into their profits. So nobody really wanted to give the worker any sort of benefits because it was just going to make them less money. Ford had his own reasons for wanting this shift, and it is no surprise that if people have more time to themselves, then they have time to go places. And how would they get to those places? You guessed it, a brand new Model T Ford. So this guy is something else when you really think of it. He altered the entire fabric of society so that he could make a buck. It wasn't all bad. Because before the actions of Henry Ford, the work hours had been closer to half days. You know, we're talking, 12 hours plus. And now they had time off to look forward to, which made them happier, and that translated to more efficient workers. He was seeing more productivity from less hours, which is, it's really a no-brainer when you think about it. And even 100 years ago, Ford knew that the key is to be nice to your employees, even if you don't mean it. Like, even if you don't mean it, just be nice. Like, it goes a long way. The son of Henry Ford, who has an interesting name, Edsel Ford. I have a quote here from him while he was the president after his father, and he says that every man needs more than 1 day a week for rest and recreation. The Ford Company has sought to promote an ideal home life for its employees, and we believe that in order to live properly, every man should have more time to spend with his family. End quote. What we've just been discussing was really, like I said, the pioneering of the 5-day work week, and we see that it comes from Henry Ford. And so what we're going to talk about now is how you take something like that and turn it into a national movement and turn it into something that basically everybody does. Because what we were just talking about, while that's the beginning of it, he's one of the first few companies to do so. So it's not, what we're talking about is in no way national and probably doesn't even get outside of Detroit. In the late 1920s, the Communist Party and the Trade Union Unity League, try to say that 10 times, organized unemployed people into councils who then did national protests and demonstrations calling for a number of things, one of them being a 7-hour workday and a 5-day work week. They also wanted an additional day added for dangerous jobs with no reduction in wages. This led labor unions to focus on less work time as their platform. The 30-hour bill was introduced into the Senate by Senator Hugo Black in March 1933. It passed 53-30, but it would not make it out of the House. President Roosevelt thought the bill was unworkable and unconstitutional. What came later was the National Industrial Recovery Act of 1933, and this is what Roosevelt thought was better than the 30-hour bill. There were strikes after this act went into effect, but this was due to factory owners being unwilling to work with the trade unions that were representing the employees in their transition to the lower work hours, which is similar to what I was talking about earlier, which is this, to say that you can pass the act all you want, but it's really about people enforcing the laws. In May 1935, the U.S. Supreme Court nullified the National Industrial Recovery Act and gave the power over hours and wages back to employers. Obviously, the factory owners just went back to working the way they wanted to, and the hours became long once again. Roosevelt was reported to have regretted not supporting the initial 30-hour bill when it was in Congress. The Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 is what truly outlines the work week that we all know now. It was initially established to be a 44-hour working week, and 2 years later, it dropped to 40. A minimum wage was guaranteed during this in this act, and that was something that did not exist before. Overtime was also established, and it was established at time and a half. So, before that, overtime just didn't exist. You worked all these long hours, you got paid what they paid you. Whereas now that they've, the Fair Labor Standards Act has said this is what a actual work week is, and so anything above that, you must now pay them, time and a half, and anything below that is now considered to be part-time. Needless to say that corporations were against this, with some likening it to the beginning of communism and some challenging the legislation in court. It failed. All of their legal efforts failed. Believe it or not, there was even a discussion about lowering the work week even more in the late 50s and 60s, but it was decided by LBJ and JFK that this was not the way to get people out of poverty. Okay, so being that this is episode 4 now, I was thinking about putting in a new segment that may or may not stick around, but it's always shown up in the last few episodes for me doing my research, and so I figured I would, just kind of say, well, this is a part of the show now. This is a part of the podcast. So what we're going to call this is, tentatively, if you have better names for it, you can let me know. Things I didn't know before. Yeah. And I might even do like an echo, like, things I didn't know before. Or like, things I didn't know before. I don't know. But we'll get to that. The two things that I have today that are the things that I didn't know before, well, they're basically things that I discovered while doing the research for this podcast. It is that the earliest recorded strike on American soil is in New York, or was in New York, in 1786, when some journeyman tailors protested a wage reduction. I just thought that was interesting because you never think about it. We know what strikes are. We're going to think of a lot of good ones or important ones over the years, and we can never think about who was the first person in the last 300, 50 whatever years to be like, nah, man, no, I'm not doing that. So they had to start somewhere. The second one is that the first unionized workers in America were a group of shoemakers in Philadelphia in 1794, and they were called the Federal Society of Journeymen Cordwainers. Cordwainers. Yeah, that's an interesting name. So cordwainer basically just means shoemaker. Okay, so that was episode 4, where we found out where the 5-day work week came from. I thought it was pretty interesting. There are definitely more interesting things out there, but now we have an idea why overtime exists and how a part-time job even exists. Thanks for tuning in. Next week we will be discussing the GPS. Yeah, global positioning system. How did that happen? I think it's actually probably more interesting than the 5-day work week, if you ask me. Once again, I've been your host, Richard Dix, and thank you for tuning in.
Judy was boring.
Hello.
Then Judy discovered ChumbaCasino.com.
It's my little escape.
Now Judy's the life of the party.
Oh, baby, mama's bringing home the bacon.
Whoa, take it easy, Judy. The Chumba life is for everybody. So go to ChumbaCasino.com and play over 100 casino-style games. Join today and play for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Lucky Land Casino, asking people, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
Lucky? In line at the deli, I guess?
Aha, in my dentist's office. More than once, actually.
Do I have to say?
Yes, you do.
In the car before my kids' PTA meeting.
Really?
Yes.
Excuse me, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
I never win and tell.
Well, there you have it. You can get lucky anywhere, playing at LuckyLandSlots.com. Play for free right now. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.